Hey, it's Trail over at GOHUNT. As we move past the holiday seasons and into the early months of 2023, we are full on in application season. And before you get into the main parts of application season, there are definitely some considerations, some planning that you want to put in place before you get into the main part of those draws so that you can maximize your potential to put permits in your pockets for 2023. So with that, I wanted to run through some considerations, some tips and tricks that I personally use before I get into the main part of application season. The first thing I do every year is I review the number of bonus points and preference points that I have for each species in each state. And you might be asking yourself, why is it important to review and know what you have in bonus points or preference points for each species in each state? And the reason that those are so critical is that that is the main avenue for getting permits in the West. Almost every state allocates their permits through a state draw, and many states utilize a point system, whether that's a bonus point system or a preference point system. And so you really got to know the number of points you have for each state and each species so that you can maximize your tags for the fall. That's really going to be the key to helping you draw permits going into 2023. So for me, the first thing I do is I go through and I review the number of points I have for each species. A relatively new feature within your Insider account that allows you to easily track your points from year to year is Point Tracker. And I don't know how many people, even insiders, that are familiar with this, but essentially what it does is allows you to add the number of points you have for each state and each species into your profile. And then as you're doing research within your Insider account, it's actually going to populate your point level for the species that you're researching. So for example, Wyoming. I can go to Wyoming Game and Fish's website, I can pull up my account, I can see the number of points I have for each species. I can then go back to my Insider account, I can manually update those point levels, and as I do my research, it's going to populate my odds at my point level. That becomes extremely handy when you're trying to research and find the best utilization for the number of points you have for the species that you're researching. Another great thing about that point tracker is that it allows you to actually build profiles for yourself and anybody else that you might be applying for. So for example, in my house, I've got two boys that are of hunting age, so I'm applying for those guys for hunts in the States, and I'm doing some research for them, and I can actually build out and maintain a profile with their bonus points and preference points for each state and each species. So use that point tracker. Like I said, update that right now. One tip I would have for you is that I would go through and update every state, every species that you apply in so that you're not guessing, if it's outdated information. Just go through, do all of it at one time so that as you're doing your research throughout the spring, you are looking at current data and you're looking at your best odds, you're looking at the best hunts for the number of points that you have. All right. The next step for me is to evaluate my priorities on the species that I want to hunt. There are some species throughout the West that I would love to hunt, but those are more of a pipe dream, if you will. So I'm talking bighorn sheep, bison, moose, mountain goat. For the most part, those permits are very hard to draw. And there are some states that allocate random permits, but for the most part, I probably will not have the points in my lifetime to draw some of the permits for those species in the various states. So those applications for me for those species are actually, relatively easy, to be honest, because I'm only applying for states that are going to allocate random permits. Those are pretty straightforward. Really, my bread and butter every year is going to be deer, elk, and antelope. And those are kind of going to be the species that I'm looking at to fill in my hunt schedule for each fall. So I would say my second consideration is to think about my budget. And that's going to include both the cost to apply and also for the tags. Many states require you to buy a hunting license in order to apply. In some states it makes sense, and in some states it may not. Ultimately, you're going to have to decide for yourself. If you open up your Insider account, you go to the state rules and regs section, we're actually going to break down each individual state's draw, including whether you need to buy a hunting license in order to apply, or potentially like in a state like New Mexico, where you have to float the cost of the hunting license until you get your results, and then if you're unsuccessful, they're going to refund you back. But we're going to break that down within those state rules and reg sections, as well as the cost. So I would say within your Insider account, definitely check that out. Also, as those application strategy articles come out for each state and each species, we're going to break that out in those application strategy articles, and we're going to give you an idea on whether we think it's worth it to apply or not. A few tips for you. In states that require you to buy a hunting license in order to then apply for their hunts, I would suggest that you apply for any and all species that you're interested in hunting. I would definitely advise that in states that allocate permits randomly. If you can justify the cost of buying the hunting license to apply, you might as well apply for any and all species that you can. Build points for those species where it makes sense for future hunts. But that's, again, it's a cost value judgment you want to make as you look at each individual state and each species that you're applying for. Next tip, I would definitely encourage you to open up your insider account, get deep into the draw odds and into the application strategy articles, and kind of do a evaluation, a cost analysis, if you will. How much is it going to cost me to apply for this species over time to potentially draw a permit? And in some states, for some species, it may not make sense. So let me give you an example. Colorado moose, sheep, and goat. You're actually not even entered into the draw until you've built up 3 points. And those points are going to be $100 per species. And then at the 3rd year, you can actually apply without having to purchase the point if you choose to do so. So you're actually potentially going to be in $900 for those 3 species if you apply before you even actually really have a chance to draw those permits. And then if you look at the odds over time for those species, it may not be worth it to you apply. The odds of drawing those 3 species in a state like Colorado are very low. Maybe you really want to hunt moose in Colorado, and to you it makes sense to have a chance in the draw. For others, it may not. For me, personally, I built my 3 points for those species, and I do apply. I don't buy the points at this point. I just don't think it's worth it. But it really is a cost value analysis that you need to make. And you need to make that for each state and each species that you apply for. You need to look at the odds. You need to look at the cost of applying over time and make a judgment call on whether you think it's worth it to you or not. My next tip in regards to budget is credit cards. You need to ensure that you have the room on your credit cards to apply for the various states throughout the West. Make sure that your credit card is up to date. When those draws happen, you want to make sure that your card hasn't expired so that they can charge it. A state like Arizona, if they try to charge your card and it's expired and it rejects it, they're not going to call you and try to get those funds. So you definitely want to make sure that your credit cards have the room to apply for the various permits that you're interested in. You may have to get several credit cards to apply for the hunts that you want to throughout the West. Some states, New Mexico, Wyoming, for example, they are going to charge you the full cost of those licenses when you apply for them, and they may hold on to them for a fair amount of time before they actually conduct the draw, and you're going to get a result, and you're either going to get refunded if you're unsuccessful, or they're going to keep those funds that you've already paid. So make sure that your credit cards are up to date, make sure that you have the room that you need to apply. And maybe we'll do another video and kind of touch on some credit card strategies. But like I said, one of my major tips is make sure that your credit cards are up to par and that you can afford to apply for those hunts. My next tip is evaluating each state to get your best bang for your buck. There are some states that have extremely tough draw odds. I'm looking at Nevada, which I'm standing in the state of Nevada right now. There's a lot of species in Nevada. If you decide to start building points for and applying for, you may not draw those. If you're looking at elk, bighorn sheep, some of the premier deer units, those are hunts that you potentially may not draw, for decades, maybe potentially even in your lifetime, depending on the species. The cost of applying in Nevada is relatively expensive. You have to buy a hunting license. You also have to pay an application fee. You may be a couple $100 in Nevada applying for every species if you decide to do so every year. And it may not be worth it depending on the odds for the species. So you really want to do that cost-benefit analysis over time. It may be worth it to you, it may not be. Me, for example, Nevada, I do think it's worth it because I can look at hunts for mule deer that I can draw potentially in maybe 5 to 8 years. And I can draw that permit, and for me that's a means to justify continuing to buy that hunting license and applying in that state. But I would advise you, do the research, look at the state rules and reg section, look at those application strategy articles, and really do a cost-benefit analysis on whether you think it's worth your continued application year after year to try to draw the permit that you're hoping to. Lastly, I would encourage you to set a budget. Set a budget for your applications and also for the permits that you could potentially draw, and stick to it. Every year, I would love to apply for every species across the West in every state. I can't afford it. You know, don't get baited into applying for hunts that you can't afford. Set a budget, stick to it. I would highly advise you not going in the hole on your credit cards. I've done it before. I don't recommend it. You know, pick a number and then do the analysis within your insider account and find the hunts that you're going to get your best bang for your buck over time. Stick to your budget and apply for those hunts. My next tip to you would be to think about the time off you have to hunt. Ideally, we would all have a ton of time to hunt each fall, but with work, family, we definitely don't have as much time as I think we would all like. I would encourage you to think about your hunts and the amount of time that you have off to hunt, and also schedule that early. You know, if you've got a job where you need to get your time off request in well in advance, think about that. One other tip we're thinking about in regards to time off to hunt, personally, I would prefer to put my days off into one hunt versus spacing that out across 2 or 3 different hunts. So here's an example. If I've got 10 days off, I would rather put those 10 days into an elk hunt, and I would rather be out there consistently hunting day after day for that one tag than I would to space those days off into 2 different hunts. I've found, and this is just personal, everybody kind of have to think about this themselves. I've found that over time, I'm more successful and I'm more satisfied with my hunt if I put all my days off into less hunts. I feel like I get a better experience, I feel like I'm more successful, and I typically kill a larger, older age class animal. I just think it takes time, days off in the field consistently to be successful. So think about that. Think about your priorities, think about your time off, get it scheduled early, and make sure that you get those days off to get out and go hunting and make the most of them. All right, my last tip is to think about what hunts you want to go on. What is your priority? For some people, it might be a species. You know, we might be diehard archery elk hunters, for example, and have to make sure that we get an archery elk hunt in every single year. And that's great. Some people like Brady, diehard mule deer, they want to hunt mule deer every single year, and they base their applications on species. I'm a little bit different. Personally, my priority is making the most of the preference or bonus points I have in each state. I love to hunt elk. I also love to hunt mule deer, and there are situations like I'm in right now where I've built up points for mule deer in a variety of states that it really makes sense for me to cash those points in and go on a hunt. So for me, my priority is to get the best bang for my buck for the amount of points that I've got in each state. For you, it might be different, but I would suggest you think about your priority. Is it a species? Is it a weapon? Is it making the most of the points that you've got in each individual state? But I would say think about your priority, think about what you want to hunt, and then work your research towards that direction. So in conclusion, those are kind of my tips for you in planning your application strategy for 2023. Think about your points. Make sure that all your points are updated within your point tracker on your insider account. Start doing your research too. Pick a budget, stick with your budget, get your best bang for your buck based on analysis of each individual state and your odds to draw those permits. 3, time off. Pick how you want to spend your time off. Make sure that you schedule your time off well in advance. 4, pick your priority. Is it a species? Is it a weapon? Is it, fill in the freezer, or is it making the most of the number of preference or bonus points that you have? But pick your priority and work that route, get those hunts scheduled. Now is the time to do your research. We're headed headlong into application season. If you're not an insider, this tool is indispensable. You absolutely have to have it if you're wanting to hunt out west. It just makes things so much easier. Sign up for an insider account, do the research, get a hunt, go hunting in 2023.